Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me? I found out this morning, this center is a lot of fun, by the way. I do Zumba here, I dance here. We have a birthday party here tomorrow, so it's a great place. We get free bread from Anna Rose's, take it home, it's delicious. Good things cheap and free here. It's wonderful. Well, nice to see you all today. If Joe was alive, he'd be with his 12-year-old Dewar's Scotch, and he'd be toasting you all. There's three people I want to thank first of all, and there are some very, very distinguished people, in this audience today. Amazing people. We have brought them out of the woodworks. And I'm not going to be politically correct today. You know why? The Japanese were not politically correct. And I am a chip off the old block, and there's actually, I'm going to introduce them in a minute. There are three men here that worked with my dad. And I love wearing this flag. Don't you love it? But let me thank the three people. First of all, this is a very interesting week. Now, this is a good crowd. You'd know what this week is. VJ week. I don't dare say this to a millennial, because who knows what they'll tell me. They'll have to Google it first. But what happened this week? You all know that the Emperor of Japan surrendered on the USS Missouri. And I work in a museum called the Armed Forces Museum in Lago, Florida. I'm a tour guide. And we have the original ink pen and inkwell that the Emperor used. And I'm going to tell you today, I call this presentation The Naked Truth, because I'm going to tell you stories that have never been told before. I've been blessed. Is Arthur over here yet? No? Arthur and I used to go to Hanscom Air Base every year on April 8th, which is the day that Bataan surrendered. And the base put on a meal, and we met over 100 Japanese POWs. We have a blessing here today. We have some World War II men, and we have some POWs. But we got to tell all the stories and hear all the stories. And Arthur and I started recording them. And then the three people I want to thank for today are, first of all, Ginny for putting this on and supporting me. The minute I said it, she said, go for it. And she's not highly paid either. Number two, the Newburyport News. Angel was a history teacher, the lady that wrote that story, and she and I worked for the paper for a number of years. She loves history, and she knows somehow World War II, sadly, we have World War II vets, looks like the Civil War to this current generation, and many of the sacrifices and dedication are being lost, and I want to make sure it isn't lost. So I want to thank Angel. And most of all, she cannot be here today, but I have an amazing portfolio that you can see after the presentation. And tell me to talk slow, because I know I got a call from Florida today. Talk slow, you talk too fast. But Lee DeLaurie of Amesbury helped me put this together, and we took 1 year of research. And I live in Florida from November to May, so Lee did all the homework in the Lawrence Heritage Center, the Amesbury Library. We have 2 original documents in there. One from Harry Truman, and one from William Jefferson Clinton, excuse me. I am a nationally recognized trainer, and Slick Willie gave me an award in 1996 for being one of the top 11 trainers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Wow. And I was very impressed. He does have nice eyes. I could see why he charmed a lot of women. And I had a sax pin on, and I said, Mr. President, I want to speak to you for a minute. And he came over, and I said, my dad was a Japanese POW. He had a flag flown for Joe, and he signed the letter. So I have an original letter from William Clinton that may be worth a lot more after November, I don't know, and Harry Truman. Wow. Right. But we have some wonderful people in this audience today. and I'm going to have them stand up. I have friends that came all the way from Smithfield, Rhode Island. Imagine that? Yep. Thank you. Joe's grandson is here. Yeah, Jeremy. And I have relatives here and old-time friends. My dad worked at the Lawrence Eagle Tribune, and he also worked at the Haverhill Gazette. And one of the things that Joe did, it's an antiquated word, he was a linotypist and a proofreader, and he worked in the composing. First of all, nobody even proofreads anything anymore. They hit spell check. And linotype died when the computer came out. And there's 3 gentlemen that worked with my father right here, if you'd raise your hand, from the Lawrence Trib. Thank you. And they can tell you, Joe was upbeat, a lot of fun. A lot of people never knew my dad was a Japanese POW. They never knew it. So before I introduce the other dignitaries, anybody know what the POWs called this flag? And we're not going to be politically correct today. They had the Japanese flag, excuse me. They had to bow every day, and you had to bow deep or you got the bamboo stick right across your back. They called it the rising asshole. The rising asshole. So one of the things POWs did, they found ways to laugh. And the other things they did, they had names for all the guards, and they told the guards that, he would love this because he was a Japanese POW, they told the guards they were movie stars. So they loved it, and they'd go up and they would swear and do a lot of nice things. Unfortunately, there were a few guards that had been educated in California. So they spoke English. Yeah. Which was dangerous, right? So, but they were not, we're going to learn today about Bushido War Code, which is today ISIS, just reinterpreted, correct? I'm speaking on 9/11 and I'll tell you about that. I'm a keynote speaker. What's going on with ISIS is Bushido warriors. But anyway, the guards that came from California were less nasty, a little more tolerant. They weren't totally indoctrinated in Bushido, and they'd tell them, hey guys, this is who speaks English, so don't recognize them as a movie star. Stay away from them, okay? We have some dignitaries today. This is absolutely amazing. There are very few, to my knowledge, there are less than a dozen Japanese Bataan death march survivors in the United States, and they're all west. I believe 4 of them in New Mexico. And the reason New Mexico had so many, they activated all the units of the National Guard. So they got hit hard. And there are 4 of them alive. I've seen it on the website. But we have some World War II men here today. So we have, I'd like them each to introduce. We have Captain Duffy, right? Would you raise your hand? And how old are you, Captain Duffy? How old?
94.
Young 94. He was both a Japanese and a German POW. He's speaking tomorrow at the Newburyport Senior Center. He has a book. We have another POW. Where is he?
Right here.
Right here. Okay, and you were where, sir?
Anzio, Italy.
Oh, Anzio. Pure hell. I used to go to San Diego every year for the Veterans Parade, which is about 2 hours on Veterans Day. There used to be a nurse hanging out the thing, blowing a trumpet, yelling, "We gave him hell at Anzio." So you were a German POW. Yes, for how long?
14 months.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. Okay. I wish we had Donald here today. We would have had a crowd. I want to tell him what POWs went through, but I'll save it for later. And we have some more World War II vets. Where are you? Raise your hand. There's a World War II vet. Thank you. Where did you serve? Where were you? Where did you serve? Oh, D-Day.
And the invasion of Okinawa.
Oh my God. The museum that I work in Florida, Lieutenant Schroeder was the first man that put his feet on D-Day, and we have his boots and everything. I'm not sure which beach. William Schroeder. In the boat with him was FDR's son. He was a brigadier general. And they knew that the men were going to get massacred, so Schroeder and he were the first ones to put their feet down. Amazing. Somebody else had their hands up. Oh, over there. Okay.
I was on Okinawa.
Okinawa. Whoa, wow. And there's Leo. Leo was my neighbor at Wingate. He's going to make it to 100, Leo. Where were you, Leo?
I was aboard the USS Saratoga for 40 years.
Fantastic. Wonderful. And we have a lot of Korean vets here, right? Okay. And do we have any Vietnam vets? Wow. You're getting to be the old timers now, too. Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm going to make sure I tell this story just like it happened. So it's called The Naked Truth because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm going to tell you right like it is. And after I have some books over here and all that. I want to tell you first of all why the Merrimack Valley had so many men over there. Somebody approached me earlier. Can everybody hear me? Okay. In 1937, I have a picture of Lawrence, and it looked like hell. We were in the middle of the Depression, and all the jobs had gone to the Carolinas and Georgia. The textile industry was dying. So who came to rescue these men? The CCCs, right? And that was a generation that said, not that they wanted an iPhone or whatever, but we're going to go help our mother and father. And they went off. And $20 went home per month. That was a lot of money, wasn't it? 20 bucks. What does that buy now? 2 sandwiches and 3 coffees if you're lucky. If you go to Starbucks, forget it. Right, right. So anyway, all these guys from Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill went, because one thing you have to understand about the Conservation Corps, they were sort of like Job Corps, but they had military people that took care of them. As my dad went off to Colorado Springs, and then he fought the gypsy moth in Maine. So they wore uniforms. I have pictures. At 16, they looked like men, because they were men. It was a different world, wasn't it? Absolutely. So, you know, nobody was coddling you and buying you $100 sneakers and telling you to sit there all day. So they went off. Now they come back in 1939, and what do you think Lawrence looks like? Almost as bad as it does today. It wasn't any better, okay? There were no jobs, right? No jobs. So Fort Devens was brilliant. They came out with pictures of the Philippines, and it looked like Aruba. They showed them Leyte Bay. They had never, remember, this is before TV, this is before anything. And they had never seen water that color. And then the truth, there were many, many gentlemen, and there were a lot of old timers that were in the Philippines because it was damn good duty. Do you know why? Who did most of the work? The Filipinos. Oh. For $3, they take care of your uniform, shine your shoes, clean your gun. And the officers that lived in Corregidor, Dad was in Corregidor, would leave at noon and play polo or go swimming. So it was wonderful duty. So what did these gentlemen from Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill do? Sign up. So they did get 6 or 7 good months of, what do you call it? Nice times. Yeah. Actually, I can say this now because my mother, Lorraine, is dead, but she's probably listening. He had a Filipino girlfriend, which was nice. Every Sunday she said she'd go to Mass, but she really didn't. She skipped Mass, and Joe got some good times in before the bad times. But anyway, I'm going to pass around 2 things, and I'm going to start with the presentation. First of all is the telegram that Margaret Vaillancourt got from Western Union telling her that Joe was a POW. And if you look at the date, hold on, I'll give it to you exactly. This is one thing in the museum that kids cannot believe. It's February 21st, 1943. The surrender of Corregidor was May 6, 1942, and the surrender of Bataan was April 8th. So how long did it take, folks, to get? 9 months. 9 months. So I'm going to pass that around. When I give tours in the museum, and I say to the children, how did people find out about Pearl Harbor? And you have to see them, they're so adorable. Oh, they picked up their iPhone and Googled it. No. They turned on the TV. No. And we give a prize. We say to them, there's only 2 ways that people found out about Pearl Harbor. And they said, how? And I said, they turned on the radio. They turned on the radio? And then they got a newspaper, right? Special edition newspapers, 5 cents. So the war, you know, Margaret Vaillancourt was waiting on Myrtle Street in Lawrence and didn't hear anything for 8 months. So it's a different world at that time, right? The other thing that's very interesting, this is Joe. He's adorable. He's the 3rd one from the left at the Hotel Bradford in Boston. This is the first reunion of they were called the Battling Bastards of Bataan and Corregidor. Does anybody know why? Because they held back the Japanese long enough so that we're going to find out in a minute what happened to us. But I'm going to tell you why that was so important. But this is the first reunion. These guys look great. And you'll notice some nurses in the top left-hand corner. There were many nurses that were POWs. There were many children that were POWs and many wives. In fact, I met 2 girls that were on Mindanao that was 6 and 9 when they were, the Japanese invaded the island of Mindanao, which is part of the Philippines, okay? But they were called the Angels of Bataan, and they were in San Tomas. The last one died at 99 years old, I think a year or 2 ago. Okay? All right, let's get on with the story. So it's the only surrender in U.S. history, right? Only surrender. 13,000 Americans and Filipinos died in that march. Unbelievable. I'll go on a little bit further, but MacArthur was not well loved by any Japanese POW that you ever met, and that's part of the reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Japanese never fired 1 bullet. Why? They were told not to save the ammunition. So all the men died from heat exhaustion, or as you started to swerve, they bayoneted you. And they hated tall men. Joe was little, right? Joe was little. He was 5'7". He said, thank God I was little. It saved my life. Why did they hate tall men? Because they were short. And I actually met the last Bataan survivor. He was in a nursing home in Hampton, and he was trying to carry a guy from Lowell that was 6'4", and as he swerved from the heat, the Japanese... So if you were tall, the odds of surviving were very, very slim. Okay, Jeremy's my Vanna White, Vance White today. All right. So this is a tribute to Joe, and as many of you know, and Captain Duffy, he has written a book, When We're Gone, the History is Gone. Am I right? It's gone. So let's get it for real, not the doctored up version that, you know, people have. Only 40% returned. Isn't that sad? 40. Now, very interesting, there were 4 from Lawrence. All 4 returned. So they were tough. Really, really tough. Right? Would you agree? You were a different generation. No one coddled you. Okay. So now we're going to look at some real stories. Okay, Jeremy, go ahead. All right. So, you have to understand a little bit of the history and the geography to understand why they had to surrender, and I'm sure Captain Duffy knows. First of all, the Philippines are only 7,000 miles from the coast of California. That's important, 7,000. And Hawaii is a little over 2,000, all right? So the Japanese idea was, correct, we're going to run the Pacific. We're going to run it. Okay? So if they could, they did for quite some time. You got to remember, FDR was more focused on the war in Europe at that point. And he was just praying. They had broken the Japanese code, and they did know something was going to happen. They didn't know where or when. So if they captured all the Pacific, who knows who would have been landing on the coast of California. So the Philippines was a key point. All right. So the first thing that happens, we lose the Navy, right, at Pearl Harbor. I learned something very, very interesting. I work with, by the way, I am the only woman docent in the United States Air Force Museum in Lago, Florida, and those men put me through the grill. I work with brigadier generals, colonels. I had to pass a test of 100 years of military history, but some reason they think women aren't interested in history, but we are. A lot of us are, okay? So what I learned in the museum, of course, it's 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. From Amesbury, there was a cook down making the bacon and eggs, and the stadium is named after him. Do you know who he is? Landry. He was the first man killed. Now, sadly, one of the reasons so many men were killed on the USS Arizona, they had won a shooting competition on Friday as the ship that had the best marksman. So what did their commander officer said? Sunday morning you can all sleep in till 9 o'clock. Isn't that sad? I learned that this year. So they were all there in their bunks enjoying a good sleep when the torpedoes came in. All right. So now, as the Navy goes, how are you going to get supplies, guns, and food, right? All right, next slide, Jeremy. Good job. All right. Next comes the destruction of Clark Air Base within 10 hours. And boy, if you know the history of MacArthur, he was not an easy man. There's a book out about him called The American Caesar. A little bit on the arrogant side. Kind of antiquated by World War II. He was really a great World War I general. And his officers and advisors are saying to him, General MacArthur, get the planes in the air. Why? They're going to come after us. They just took out the Navy. If they can take out the Air Force at Clark Air Base, the Pacific is theirs, undefendable. They argue with him and argue. I would have loved to have been alive. I wasn't alive. I wasn't born till 49. But anyway, one of his brigadier generals was so agitated, he was ready to, this is a fact, I've documented, he was ready to send the planes in the air and risk court-martial because we could have fought them. Okay, but he did it. So now they come in, they're all sitting ducks, lined up on a row on Clark Air Base, and they take out Clark Air Base. Okay, somebody's got theirs. All right. It's okay. We have people here that don't hear that well. All right, next one, Jeremy. All right. So the air attack was severe, absolutely severe. You've probably seen pictures of it. Okay. In fact, I don't know if it's 100% true, but people said it was lunchtime when they hit. They could have got them because it was foggy in Formosa and they took off late. And the men, his advisors knew they were in Formosa. But they say that as MacArthur heard the planes, he said, "Those are our men." And the advisors said, "No, they're Japanese Zeros. They're going to take us out." And they took them right out. All right. So now, who is controlling the Pacific? The Japanese. Now, how do you get guns, supplies, food, ammunition? Too dangerous. All right. So American ships did try to go. There were a lot of women. There were a lot of children there. And they try to get over there. But now we've got the Japanese really controlling. We have very little defense. And they actually took down, Arthur Obe and I met a guy that wrote a book on this at the reunion. They took down 11 ships. Actually kind of private ships, merchant marine ships, and that tried to get over. So there were no supplies, zero. So that was it. Okay. Then, because things turned to hell after that, the Japanese were landing people on Manila. Am I going too fast, by the way? No. Okay. They told me in Florida I talk too fast, but it works up here in Massachusetts. All right. Manila was declared an open city. Am I right, Captain Duffy? Open city. Holy God. And who came flying in? The Japanese. Landed thousands and thousands of troops. And sadly, there were many supplies there. There was food, there was ammunition, there were guns. And when the Japanese came in, what did our poor men do? They ran to the very end of the Bataan Peninsula, and then some were able to get to boats in Corregidor. My dad was already in, that was the coastal artillery from Fort Devon. So they but they ran with nothing but their backpacks and their guns. Yeah. So they retreated, and they lived for 6 months on half rations. There's a gentleman here, his dad, right there. His dad was in the cavalry, because New Mexico had horses there. What do you think the men ate? Yeah. The horses, the snakes, the rats, anything. Fortunately, this was not a crowd used to brioche and crepes. I have a little grandson in California. He said, Mimi, I go out and I have brioche and crepes. I said, oh my God, your great-grandfather would lucky if they had a piece of bread, right? So it's a different world today. So they were so sick, these poor guys. They estimate there were 10,000 of them near death or critical illness. And Ned King, Skinny Wainwright, at this point MacArthur has been taken out. He's in Australia as the Supreme Commander. FDR ordered him out. But they have no choice but to surrender, okay? Now, believe it or not, Ned King, and I'm going to tell you a little known fact about Ned King, a great Southern general. He goes to Homer, and you know what Homer says? You can't surrender. Unbelievable. Because in the Japanese vocabulary, there is no such word as surrender. And Homer believed what? They were just going to fight till they dropped dead. Yeah. Because that's what his men were told to do. His men were called penny soldiers. Because when you died, guess how much they spent notifying your family? 1 cent on a postcard. So the Japanese, you know, you were fodder, basically. So now he's got 10,000 men dying, sick, and the rest of them are going to go. And probably a little known fact that made it very hard for these battling bastards. They were using World War I ammunition and Browning rifles. World War I. So now, 35 years this ammunition has been sitting in humidity. How well did it work? It didn't work well. They said they had more, and the Browning rifles were from World War I, right? And they actually wore World I helmets. Yeah, okay. Oh, listen, just keep going. I want to see you all reach 100. I really do. You're all amazing. You're amazing. I'm hoping to reach 100 too, but that's down the path. So anyway, they can't fight anymore. No more, all right. Finally, Ned King finds a man that was educated in California. He talks it through, and he said, you're going to be my interpreter with Homer, and you're going to talk like a Japanese mind and convince him. So on the second day that Ned King, General Ned King, approaches him, then he does surrender. But there's 2 facts that aren't known, that have been hidden from many, many people. Poor Ned King, he goes. Now Wainwright, Skinny Wainwright, stayed in Corregidor. Okay, he's all set. That was another reason Homer didn't want to surrender. He wanted Wainwright. Wainwright says, I'm going to hold out as long as I can. But Ned King's grandfather was also, he came from a long line of military generals. He was quite the man. Guess what his grandfather was? He was at Appomattox with Lee, signing the surrender of the Civil War. So as Ned King approaches Homer with his interpreter, he said, "Oh my God, my family has a curse on it," you know. He was brokenhearted. The other not known fact, what do you think now? Ned King says to Homer, "Get these men into hospitals, get them help, get them medicine." Oh, sure. And it's Disney World. The Japanese only wanted men who could fight, who could be slaves, who could do labor for them. So he rolls out about 8,000 to 10,000 men that are seriously ill, that need hospitalization and medicine. And we know from documentation and eyewitnesses, many of these men were just driven to side roads and pushed off cliffs. Right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were not. The Japanese had no use for anybody. Am I right? You knew that, correct? Absolutely. You can't work, you die. So 1 month later, Skinny Wainwright, tall, skinny guy from Schenectady, New York, quite the general. And they hated him. They tall, 6'5", lean and mean. What do you think the Japs did to him? Beat him.
Beat him.
A general. So obviously they had no use for the Geneva Code. Geneva Code. It was inconceivable. But during the, and you have to understand, and my father understood this, that Bushido Code surrender is horrific. Many men, many of the guards in the prison camps upon the surrender committed harikari and disemboweled themselves. And interesting, in the last 5 or 6 years in my research, I found out there were Japanese POWs, okay? When the war was over, they weren't allowed to go back to their families because they were considered a disgrace. They were actually sent to a special city or area that the Japanese set up because they didn't want them infiltrating their families. So you can see the power of religious fanaticism, as we do today with ISIS, the same kind of craziness, you know. I've got to do what I've got to do for my religion and my country. And it's fanatical. Right. So 12,000 men died between the march and being tossed aside, or some of them knew they couldn't make it. Sadly, because the Philippines was such good duty, and New Mexico was a great example of this, they had a lot of 40 and 50-year-old men that were stationed there, and they knew they couldn't make the march, not at 50 years old, so they just sat down on the side of the road and died, or waited for a Jap to come along and bayonet them. But a lot of people don't know that. Not a single bullet was shot, and Homer was fascinated with that. Okay, so are we all up to it in this point? We understand what happened? Okay. Have I lost anybody? No? All right, I'm doing a good job. So the men stayed at 3 prisons, Cabana Tawan, Billabad, and Camp O'Donnell. Now, the thing was, these were not set up as POW camps. Why? Japanese army never thought they were going to take a prisoner. So they were horrible. There were no latrines, right? Am I right? No supplies. So these men walked into this, and my dad told me this many, many times. He said, those first 6 months, we were burying 200 to 250 men a day because the flies were rampant. There wasn't a good food system set up to feed them. The food was minimal. And there was no latrine. So everything, you know, everybody had dysentery, beriberi, and so forth. So the men the Americans had some pretty smart officers, pretty smart officers, and they said, these Japanese aren't going to help us. So they built up committees, like committees to build latrines, committees to set up a system for food, because it was paranoia when food came out. People were crazy, they were starving. All right, so we go on. Mostly they just ate rice and soup with beans and bread at lunch. And amazingly, Joe still ate rice. Although he didn't want my mother too much to do rice, okay, but that's all they ate. So if you noticed in that picture of the Hotel Bradford, some of them had sunglasses on. They lacked vitamin A. And when you don't have vitamin A, you can go what? Blind. So many of them had blindness. All right. They had no protein, no fruit, and they were dying. Now, my dad was savvy. He was from Lawrence. Now, these kids they were street smart. Nobody had coddled them. And he realized that even in the Japanese POW camps, there was going to be a black market. Am I right? It was people that ran it. So his best friend Russ from Washington State went blind. But Russ was a wheeler dealer. So they protected Russ, and they told the Japanese he's keeping the area clean, he's doing this. They told him some baloney story. And Russ would negotiate. And one of the key things he negotiated was cigarettes.
Oh, yeah.
And with cigarettes, and then my father realized, I got to get out of this camp. I don't want to see this dying every day, but I'm going to go out on work details. And there are Filipinos that were highly loved the Americans, risked their life. And when they would come to the Filipinos with cigarettes or whatever, they could get pieces of fruit or maybe even sometimes medicine. So the cigarettes, and then once you got back, if you had some, so mostly it was the Filipinos and the men, and Joe went out constantly, took every work detail to get out of the camp because there were greater chances to get stuff. And they worked 12 hours a day. Okay. Now, they had some wild diseases. They had beriberi, they had malaria, they had dysentery, and they had TB. And those were tropical diseases. What kind of diseases did they have in the German POW camps? Malaria, dysentery, same thing, yeah. Horrible diseases. And they weren't eating correctly, the food wasn't clean where they were cooking it, and of course their bodies were worn down. So they're really tough diseases. And I'm going to tell you about wet beriberi in a minute. It's a very, very painful disease. All right. They also hardly wore any clothes. They wore loincloths. Yeah. This is the tropics. Okay, you just went through some tropical days. So they were sunburned. My dad, right up till he died, he would go to the VA in Lowell. They had a special group for POWs, and so does Manchester, New Hampshire. And they would have to lance his skin because there were things that had grown in his skin. Okay, and the Filipinos were absolutely wonderful. Now, what the men would do, and I'm going to ask you in a minute, they would injure themselves to get time off. Doesn't that make sense? Yeah. Sure. Injury is better than, and of course the easiest one was breaking fingers. My dad's fingers, right, Jeremy? You remember that? Pepe's fingers were all crooked, so they'd break their fingers. Sometimes they really wanted a long time off, they'd break their arm. Hey, better off to break your arm than be in 12 hours. You needed a rest. But the favorite one was they would cut themselves and put it in the urine and tell the Japanese that they're bleeding, their urine is bleeding. Usually they could get a week off like that. Now, very interesting. In a few minutes, and I give many, many motivational talks, POWs have taught me, and I'm sure Captain Duffy's and this other gentleman, you have minds of titanium. I honor all of you because you have learned that your mind is the only thing, correct? They can't take. You're under 100% control. But what you have to do when you're a prisoner, as we do with the terrorist, you have to study them. You have to study your enemy. And the Japanese were highly, highly ritualistic. Very, very ritualistic. Which the terrorists today aren't. But it somewhat made it easy for them to fool the Japanese, and also they were predictable. They did everything at the same time. So when they wanted to steal, very often 5 o'clock was the time to steal. So they were very, very predictable. So the first thing the men did was to study them. And one of the things that they did, they never searched the groin area. They somehow in that religion, the groin was taboo. So where did they hide everything? In the groin. They would get beans, snakes. They loved king snakes. Tastes like chicken. They'd kill snake. Hey, they were smart, man. These kids hadn't eaten, top food in the 30s anyways, right? So everything tasted good, and they'd hide everything in the groin area, and they never got searched. Isn't that amazing?
Wow, yeah.
So they were fortunate. Today's terrorists would not be so predictable. Okay, go on. The other thing they did, and my dad actually mentored me. I was very blessed. A lot of POWs did not want to talk about what had happened to them till later in life. When they realized, I'm so old, when I go, the story is gone. And as we met them at Hanscomere Base, towards the latter years, they were telling the stories. But my dad, I can remember him at 5 or 6 years old. I lived in Cape Cod House in Lawrence, Mass., South Lawrence, and I would hear this screaming. He had night terrors. Do you still have night terrors? Do you have dreams?
No.
Not anymore? Did you have them? Yeah. Most of them did. But I'd hear him screaming, and I'd say, what language is he screaming? And he was screaming Japanese.
Really?
So what he had learned to do, he was very sharp, he had learned enough Japanese to know what those guards were saying. And that's another survival technique, learn the language. This looks like are you a World War II guy, sir, coming in? Hello, welcome. Were you from World War II?
Yes.
God bless you. No?
Looking for a place.
Okay, you can't hear all the way, that's all right. All right, so how did you survive? This is fascinating. I teach these techniques, and I'd love to hear from the POWs we have here. First of all, attitude is altitude. Would you agree, Patrick? So my father used to say, if anybody says, I want to die, what would happen? They'd die. They would die. So, and boy, anytime I want to complain, and my honey will tell you, I don't complain too much. I think of Joe. What have I got to complain about? I have a nice house, a nice life, I eat good food, I can have medicine. I have nothing to complain about, all right? But what they did, they kept saying, I am going to go home. Did you do that? I'm going to go home. Look at you, you're both here. Thank God you said that, or you'd be over in some grave overseas, right? But they kept saying they wanted to go home. And what they did, they hung around with men that thought like they did. Doesn't that make sense? I'm reading a book on the willpower instinct. You want to stay healthy, you don't want to drink, you don't want to overeat, don't hang out on Martini Row with obese people that drink all day long at happy hour. You'll end up like them. So what they did is they congregated among positive men that knew together. All right? This is fascinating. Also, they had to work in groups of 4 or 5. Why was that? You can't survive in prison by... They inspired each other, they helped each other. Somebody got sick, they looked out for each... You have to have support. Absolutely, number one. If I ever end up in prison, I hope not, but you have to have support. Now, they use the sense of smell. This is fascinating, and I'm going to tell you an amazing story and book. Because smell is your strongest sense to bring you back to where you want to be. If I told all of you in this room, tell me your favorite smell and your favorite place. My mother, God rest her soul, she ate all the time, right, Jeremy? Jeremy loved going to the beach with her. She had her stops all the way. She loved when she got off of $4.95 and smelled the hamburgers at Burger King. She'd open up the window. Boy, did these smell good. Oh, she loved that. She'd go around the block twice just to get those hamburgers. Oh, Lorraine was a character. But anyway, smell gets you out of the misery. It makes you think of a better place. They now use this with cancer victims.
Alzheimer's too.
And Alzheimer's, correct. Say a cancer victim says, I want to be alive for Thanksgiving. They will pump in while they're getting therapy. This is a new therapy being done, and they do it with Alzheimer's. They will pump in the smells of Thanksgiving that you love so that your body says, I'm going to make it.
Yeah.
Or for the Alzheimer's, it brings them back to a time that they remember their mother's favorite apple pie. Now, Joe loved, that's not, I did a boo-boo. It's White Castle, right?
Yeah, White Castle.
White Castle. He loved White Castle's hamburgers, and he loved kissing girls on Dewey Beach in Charlestown and smelling Schraff's chocolates. In fact, I worked in that building. I was headquartered out of the Schraff's building, and now it's not a beach, but it's just down the hill from Bunker Hill, but it's more like a marina. But they used to kiss the girls and smell chocolates. Now, I am a firm believer nothing happens by accident. Last year I'm in Florida, and I see a lovely gentleman with a World War II hat. I said, hello, I would like to buy you a cup of coffee or whatever you want at McDonald's. Will you come with me for a few minutes? And I'm a half-decent looking woman, so he said, okay. And he came in. I talk to anybody. I'm outgoing. So he sat down, and lo and behold, I'm in Largo, Florida. He was from Boston.
Oh.
And without even knowing this, remember, the first reunion was where? Hotel Bradford. So I said to him, Joe loved White Castle hamburgers. And he looks at me, and it was like Joe came right through him. He said, guess where White Castle was? I said, I have no idea. Next door to the Hotel Bradford. So I learned last year in 2015 that as he entered that hotel for the first reunion, he used the smell that kept him going. He said, I'm going to go back and have a Schraff's chocolate, and I'm going to go back and kiss a wonderful girl and eat all the chocolate I can. All right. Now, fantastic. There is a book. And it's pretty easy reading. It's, if you want to write it down, or you can see me after, it's called Tears in the Darkness by Ben Steele. Has anybody in here read that? Fabulous book. And Ben Steele, to my knowledge, last year was still alive in Billings, Montana. He's a young 94 like you, and like you. You're how old? You're young. How old are you?
91.
91. You're a chicken. Chicken. 91. So anyway, Ben Steele wrote a book. And Ben, you know, we have grandkids, right, Jeremy, that are a little coddled? Oh yeah, a little spoiled brats. But anyway, they didn't coddle kids in those days. No. So Ben Steele was placed by his dad on a ranch in Gallup, Montana with 100 horses at 8 years old. Wow. To take care of them. What would happen now if you put an 8-year-old? The horses would all run away. They'd be yelling for their iPhone. There's no Wi-Fi out here, right? So Ben Steele was one tough kid. All right, he slept on ground, it was cold, it was windy. He cleaned up after the horses. Today they'd probably, what's that called? Social services? They probably would have sent social services after you because you're abusing your child. Yeah, child labor. But anyway, it saved his behind. So now Ben Steele gets put in 0 ward. 0 ward is the hospitals. And obviously, you know, Captain, the reason they call them 0 wards was nobody came out. 0 chance of surviving. And they then downed you to 700 calories a day. And they just waited for you to die. Wow. So Ben Steele, being the tough kid he was, the priest comes to give him last rites. I worked in a nursing home. I saw this all the time. I had a lady from Connecticut. She says, every time I have the last rites, I revive. And she had him 14 times and lived about another 8 years. Wow. True story. Tough Irish lady. But anyway, the priest says, okay, I'm giving you the last rites. And you know what Ben Steele says? No, you're not. I'm going to live. And the priest said, you're nuts. You're in 0 ward. Nobody comes out. I'm going to live. That's number 1. So what do you want me to do? No last rites. He said, I want you to go steal rice paper, and I want you to steal charcoal. And of course, the priest Japanese were very good at beheading. Don't think ISIS were the only people. That's a common way of death in Asia, beheading. Could have taken the priest's head off. And here's what Ben Steele does every way. This is a fabulous book. Every day he puts pieces of paper next to him, and what do you think he draws? The mountains in Montana, his horses, his little, he had like a little mini ranch. It wasn't more like an out, little out place, little cottage. Yeah. And then, this is amazing. I would love to get to Montana if he's still alive. He speaks on NPR. He said, to keep me going, I wrote the names of every horse, and I remembered how one horse smelled from the other, and I remembered what the sky looked like, and I remembered what the grass smelled like. So Ben Steele used smell, visualization, and attitude. 3 months later, the Japanese could not believe it. He stood up and he walked out of Zero Ward. He was cured of wet beriberi, which is hell. You blow up like a big Buddha doll and everything leaks. And he no longer had dysentery or malaria. So he wrote his book, Tears in the Darkness. Amazing. He speaks on NPR. Okay. So if you want to go home, you better say, I'm going home. Yeah. All right. Joe Vaillancourt got to witness Nagasaki. He was in camp, brought over on the hell ships to Camp 17 to dig coal for the Japanese. And the hell ships were horrible. In this book I have my story of my dad, but I also have the story that he told at my niece's school in Berwick, Maine, that he wrote. And he said when he was in the hell ship, he thought he was never going to be clean. Because down in the hole, dirty, men sick, everything. And men would go nuts. They'd go nuts being in those holes. And you had to kill a man next to you if he was nuts. But he said in there, when he did the story for my sister's children, he said, I never thought I would be clean again, just in there, dirty, dirty. So, fortunately, he made it to Camp 17 on the island of Omoto, and he dug coal. Now, he loved the third shift. Why? Japanese weren't quite as awake. It was much cooler, a lot less action. You could steal, rob a little bit more. People were more tired on third shift. And I have a great story that the rat story. I told this at my dad's eulogy. Everybody loved it. I told the priest to sit down. I said, I don't care what you got to say. What I got to say is better. Right? My cousin's here. I gave his eulogy. Absolutely. And Arthur's here. So anyway, at night they could steal a little bit more. Okay? And he says, I'm going to take an extra loaf of bread, steal it when the Japanese fall asleep, break it in half, come back tomorrow morning and bargain cigarettes for it. I'm going to come back with right? Always did that in a POW camp. Except, just as he got that extra loaf of bread, along comes the biggest, fat, juiciest rat you ever saw, and he grabbed the bread in his mouth. And he's running down the shaft of the coal mine, and Joe's swearing. And he starts chasing him and running him. And of course, the guard woke up and saw Joe running, so he took a beating from hell that day. Yeah, so it didn't work out too good, but that's the rat story, one of my stories. So now, they did notice towards August of 1945, the Japanese, and I'm going to ask you, Captain, if they started acting different. They weren't quite as brutal, quite as nutsy. They must have had word that things were, going off. So one morning, or later in the afternoon, they're 35 miles, can you imagine this, from Nagasaki, and and I reread his passage, and he said this horrific cloud with a smell like he had never smelled. They assumed they hit an ammunition dump. That's what they assumed. But then the men said, wow, that doesn't smell right. They didn't know what it was. Now, when Joe returned to Lowell, and was with the POW groups, they told them, watch out when you have children. So that's what's wrong with me. Now you know. They thought we would be born deformed or with problems because they had been exposed to extreme radiation, 35 miles. However, the island of Omoto was on a bay, Nagasaki, and the wind was blowing in the opposite direction that day. So I only am a little bit nutty, just a little bit. But these guys took the chance and had children, not knowing, they didn't know which way the wind was blowing that day. Okay, so how do you stay alive? Just in case ISIS comes to the senior center and wants a bunch of old farts and decides to capture us. You never know. Well, first of all, you had to be aware of who was the most brutal gods, correct? Now, ISIS does the exact same thing. I'm giving a talk on 9/11. At noon, I'm the featured speaker at Unity on the River. And what the Japanese did is exactly what ISIS does. The Japanese picked psychosomatic, crazy, angry people to be the gods. If you've read the book, The Unbroken, that man was psychotic, sadomasochist. So what they did, they studied the men that could not get along in the regular military, had them psychologically tested, and if they were wacko, they made them a god or a commander. I just finished the book Boston Strong, fascinating, and that the lead, I can't say his name, but the lead kid that died was angry to the point of craziness because he was a great boxer, and when he went to Utah for the Golden Gloves, he was told he could not compete because he was not a United States citizen. And he never got over it. And his mother was radicalized, and she said, that's it. You take care of the Americans. You could have been the next Muhammad Ali. So and then they're Chechens, and they went back there and they trained. So they always pick the angry, violent people. You're absolutely right, Cheryl. They can't get over. Same idea. So you don't break their code. They have a code, you don't break it. Next one. I'm almost wrapped up. Also, he did notice a change in attitude, and guess what? After the 2 bombs went off, what do you think happened? The gods were saying, I'm your friend, I'm your friend. Oh yeah, they calmed right down. And a number of them, 6 or 7 of them, take a samurai sword and disembowel themselves because it was complete disgrace. Yeah. Before, I'm about to wrap up, we have 2 wonderful POWs here that I think is amazing. Was there anything that you would like to add to today? Did I cover it pretty good? How to survive?
I call it the art of survival.
The art of survival, absolutely. And look at your eyes, they still sparkle after all you've been through. Okay, wonderful. How about you, sir? Anything you'd like to add?
You have a meaner attitude than theirs.
You had to be tough. You had to be mean, and you had to be tough. And I'm going to wrap up with the story of forgiveness in a minute. But this was interesting. Now the survivors we have an organization called the Descendants of the Battling Bastards of Bataan and Corregidor. We give scholarships to kids going to college that tell the story and preserve it. Because we know when we're gone, the story is gone. But I met a guy, they had a panel. I was in Pittsburgh, I think 5 or 6 years ago. And this guy was the toughest 16-year-old I had ever seen, he said. He said at 15 there was no money, no food, so his mother drove him to they didn't have cars, brought him to the trains to ride the hobo trains. You can believe it? So he said, for 2 years I'm riding the hobo trains. Oh, that must have been nice. No, it wasn't. But I learned a lot, and I knew how to survive. So he said, I lied. I came out at 16. I couldn't take it. It was dangerous. And he said exactly what you said. He said, I'm 17 years old, and I'm looking at these Japs, and I go, those son of a bitches aren't going to get me. I'm going to make this march. And he was mean, tough. He had fought off hobos, beatings, knifings, and I'm looking at him. I said, "You were 17?" He said, "Yeah." Now this is the truth. The reunion was in Pittsburgh, and he lived in Washington State. He was 90 years old. I said, "How did you get here?" He said, "I got in a car and drove across the United States." I go, "Oh my God, you have to go." Your ride is here, and your daughter's going to be wonderful to have you come. It's an honor. Give this guy an applause. Fantastic. Woo! I'll tell you, it makes my heart jump to see it, you know? See it. Okay. Now, so they had, as you said, you had to be tough. You had to be tough. You couldn't give in. They had prayer. They had smart courage. Where did you grow up?
In Haverhill, Mass.
Oh, you were a tough little Merrimack Valley kid too, right? So they were street smart, you know? You couldn't Google anything to get the answer, right? You were savvy. So, he taught me right away, number one, attitude is altitude. Is that true? I live my life every day with passion. And I count my blessings every day. Absolutely. Even when I just drink a bottle of water, I'm so thankful to have water. Joe drank bison urine. Bison urine. But it was good. It was wet and it had protein.
Yeah.
So he survived the march with bison urine. Secondly, this is amazing. This is it. When I get aggravated or pissed off at somebody, I say, "Pat Vaillancourt, your father forgave the Japanese." So I don't know if Jeremy remembers this, but in 1994, my sister and I used to alternate having the Thanksgivings, and I see Joe pull up, and I'm looking. It is a Toyota Camry. You remember that, Jeremy? Nice green Toyota. I'm going, "Oh my God, if I had too much wine, or is he driving a Toyota Camry?" Because I'm going to tell you, the 4 men that survived from Lawrence, the last one, McAvoy, died about 4 years ago at 90. And he was at a Labor Day party on a lake in New Hampshire. And he had a little bit too much to drink. This is the truth. I could not make this up. And there was a Toyota SUV in front of it. He went in the car, put it in neutral, and pushed the SUV in the lake. When the police came, they said, "What is that 90-year-old man pushing a SUV?" And his son said, "Officer, can I tell you something? He was a Japanese POW. And when he has a little bit too much to drink, he thinks he's back." And so he said, "I'll take care of it." But he pushed the car in the water at 90 years old. 90 years old. He said, "Those Japanese," and they're all looking. There's his kids cooking hamburgers, and he's got the car. Oh my God, and the neighbor goes, "What's wrong with your father?" But anyway, Joe said this, and I'll never forget this, and now I bought this year, right, John? My first Toyota Camry, my first Japanese car. But anyway, he said, "Pat, it was a long, long time ago," and here was his answer. He said, these gentlemen knew Joe, right? He said, "If I live my life in bitterness and hate," kills him. Negative. I'm a mastermind trainer. I've studied with mastermind trainers all over the world, and they'll tell you negative energy takes twice the energy of positive. In fact, I worked in an assisted living for 3 years in St. Pete, and half of the cranky, crabby, pain in the asses had Alzheimer's. Because what you do is you pull in so much negativity that your body does not regenerate or stay positive. So he said, "You know what, Pat?" I said, "How can you say that, Dad?" And he said, "Well, I observed them, and they were as nasty to their own men as they were to us. It was a Bushido code. It was pure samurai, bastardized version of samurai war." And he said, one day this young private bent down, and the Japanese sergeant said, "You didn't bend enough," and he went again, and then they had bamboo sticks, and he took the bamboo sticks and beat this 18-year-old kid unconscious and left him laying in the sun for 3 days in the courtyard. That was a Japanese soldier. So he said, "I'm not going to waste my life in bitterness rage, and negativity. I let go. Now here's the part I never told till today. He went to Commonwealth Motors. He always liked to squeeze a nickel, and I'm going to wrap up. So he says to Charlie Daha, I want a Toyota Camry, and this is the price I want it for. And Charlie Daha says, are you crazy? He said, well, I got a story for you for the Lawrence Eagle Tribune. And he said, what's the story? The story is this. I'm a Japanese POW buying a Toyota Camry. So you can say what a wonderful car this is, because I'm buying it. Charlie looks at him, he says, Joe, you got this car for $3,000 less. And these men know Joe worked for the Lawrence Tribune, so when the Commonwealth Motors put an ad in, they said, Joe Vaillancourt bought a Toyota Camry. He's a POW, but he knows it's a great car. So with that, now I have a guest here today. Did he show up, Vernon? Is Vernon here? Where are you, Vernon?
About 4 hours.
Okay, Vernon. Vernon's going to do something special for you. I found Vernon through a dance partner, Ralph.
Are you ready?
I'm ready, Vernon. And I'd like you, he's going to honor these men with...
These guys are great, but I belong to the Civil War group.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I've got these things just in there.
You weren't in the Civil War.
I had 3 in the Civil War. As old as you guys are, I'm older than you, but I did know one of them. 4 years, and then he passed.
Oh. So he's going to play Joe's favorite songs today. We'd like to honor him. Thank you for coming
Why
today.
don't you go first?
Which do you want to do? Which is
I
easier?
know a million.
The Battle Hymn of the Republic. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Stand up. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Truth is marching on. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Marching on. Yeah, yeah. And then I'd love you to do God Bless America. Vernon, we need some blessings, don't we?
God bless America.
God bless us. Oh, we need it. America, let's sing it. Land that I love, stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Yeah. Can you do the national anthem? Can you do the... Yep. Yep. Here he goes. Oh, a spacious amber waves of grain, oh, purple mountain majesty, above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from from sea to shining sea. Thank you, Vernon.
Fine gentleman over here.
You know that fine gentleman? Yeah. Vernon came all the way today to honor Joe, and I have refreshments here. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for letting me tell the story. I have some books, portfolios, and I'm going to do this 9/11 at Unity at noontime, talking about that sadly the same fanaticism has taken hold, and you know, we're in war again. They're like hornets, but we're in war. God bless. Thank you all, and thank you, Vernon.